Top of the morning to you. I hope you're all fine and dandy and staying ahead of the game. Remember, it is a game, and each one of us must play our part. Welcome. We're going to look at some chapters of a book which most people who come to my page and my YouTube channel will be very familiar with. It's the book by the author Combs Beaumont. It's called The Great Deception, Britain, Syria and the Roman Conspiracy. And we're going to read from chapter 3, titled The City of Nebuchadnezzar. And the reason why I'm doing this reading, I'm sure I've read it before and uploaded a video before, but the reason why I'm doing this reading today is because I have many American followers of this work. I have many North Americans, Canadians, Alaskans, many Australians, many Christians, many Jews, many of no religious school of thought, many Gnostic, esoteric searchers, and the biggest issue that I come across in my research is people unable to accept that the lands which we call the Holy Lands, or Jerusalem, Israel, Palestine, it's very hard for people to accept the fact that these lands in the Middle East with those names are not actually the true biblical lands. What I do is I talk about standing stones, I show alignments, I show the asterism in cosmology, I decipher languages, I look at the mystery school teachings and decipher the mysteries and mythologies of the heavens, and tie that to the standing stones throughout Europe, especially Britain. And most people who are familiar with this research will be familiar with the term the Spine of Albion ley line, which of course Gary Biltcliffe and Caroline Hoare cover in their book, aptly named The Spine of Albion. So anybody who's familiar with my research will be aware of the method in which I research these things, including the great mystery of where the actual biblical lands are. And this book, which I'm away to read from, will help those, or should help those, to identify geographically and astronomically, cosmology, the cosmology of what's above, to show the true Holy Lands. And this book by Combs Beaumont has been not just a book that you would pick up and read, but for me it has been a resource book, a book of continual study. Much of what I had discovered in 2014, 2015, 2016 was later confirmed by me studying the works of Combs Beaumont. And it's great, there's a lot of people now downloading and getting access to this book and Combs Beaumont's other work, which shows Europe and Britain in a very different light. But unfortunately people, yes, it's great, people are reading them, but unfortunately people need to study them as they would the Bible. So this recording is really for those who are following the Christian path, or following the path of Christ, or following any type of religion or non-religion, and to show that what we understand as the religious lands and the religious groups and peoples are actually not in any way the same people of Eastern Europe or the Middle East as we have been led to believe, and that the original lands and people were actually the British Isles and parts of the mainland of Europe. So I'm going to be reading from chapter 3, and I'll interject as I go along if I find it necessary, if it ties up with the other research and other works that I have studied. Combs Beaumont and this book, The Great Deception, is only one of many books which I refer to repeatedly. But I study the standing stones and the waterways, the ancient valleys, the geography and the topography of the land. And I read the languages and the carvings and the cut marks, which show me exactly where the journey through heaven, and in fact where the Heaven's Gate is. And if you are familiar with my research, you will know that Heaven's Gate is Aries, the top of the Isle of Man, the top of Man, sorry, the top of the Isle of Britain, which is Man, and Aries is the head, which is Polaris, the North Celestial Pole. So anyway, where is the Holy Lands? Where did Abraham, where did Moses, where did these people actually sojourn or travel or wander before they took up the holy city, which we know as Jerusalem or Jerusalem? And I'll read and just interject if there's anything I think useful that I can add. So, chapter 3, the city of Nebuchadnezzar. Of the early Celtic inhabitants of the country, we know but little. Relics of the stone, bronze and iron ages attest their presence. The hills are everywhere, scarped with lines and entrenchments. It is extremely probable that York was the site of an ancient tribal settlement. Tradition says that the riverbanks as far as the Humber were protected by a chain of forts 2 miles apart, and that's by Canon James Rain. So it's saying here that the Humber itself was a much wider river, and it was protected by a chain of forts some 2 miles apart. So that is some fortification up a river, and obviously very important. So anyway, let's read on. History, to be properly understood, demands a correct knowledge of the lands and the areas involved. Sorry, excuse me, just get a drink of water. And we'll start again. History, to be properly understood, demands a correct knowledge of the lands and areas involved, or otherwise it becomes misleading and largely valueless. The events pertaining to Babylon affect the world to this day, and if we fail to plant our feet firmly on its true soil, they remain obscure, as though through a glass darkly. Much mystery surrounds, for example, the movements whereby the Israelites besieged in their first capital, Hebron, Egyptian Thebes or Abaris, and at the mercy of the Philistines were permitted in the 8th year of King David's reign to remove themselves and all their belongings unmolested, to march through the hostile territories and to seize with little difficulty the country of the Jebusites, with Jerusalem over 400 miles distant. By Abram, led originally south, they had in times gone by dominated the land of Mitzrayim, Egypt, for 500 years. After this long war, they were at the complete mercy of their foes, the Philistines. Josephus calls it a great war. All Syria and Phoenicia, with many others beside, came against the Hebrews. And as a side note here, 59, Josephus is in the Antiquities, volume 7, 41, and York is here being referred to as 58, what was that? 58, up here, or the early Celtic inhabitants of the country, York. The terms granted them were surprising for those harsh times. David was allowed to collect all those of his people willing to follow him and march away, wives and families too, retaining their personal belongings to the city of Jebus, which fell like ripe fruit into their hands. Such tolerance is almost inexplicable, until we can divine the reason. It seems that the surrounding nations, Egyptians or Philistines, Syrians and Tyrians, agreed amongst themselves that the Israelites must go elsewhere, and to give them the opportunity free of molestation. If they moved to a region far from their former habitation. Moreover, to reach the land of the Jebusites, they had to pass through Syria. Probably the subsequent close friendship between King Hiram of Tyre and David had something to do with this migration. In my identification of the true sites in question, these Israelites, who for centuries had dominated the west and the south, from the vicinity of Avebury in Wiltshire, where the great camp called Barbary Castle marks the original site of the citadel Hebron, assembled there under David and trekked all the way to where Edinburgh now stands. They totalled about 250,000 persons, according to Manetho, the Egyptian historian, though Josephus estimates a much higher figure, and they included 360,000 armed men. The compiler of the Book of Chronicles subsequently endeavoured to conceal the immensity of the Hebrew disaster. The text suggesting that the elders went to Hebron to anoint David as king, whereas he had already been their monarch for 7 years. 1 Chronicles 11, 1-3. Finally they set forth to acquire their new city, with the evident consent of their former foes. What route did they follow? My estimate of the period when David led his followers to Jerusalem is BC 1649, nearly 3,600 years ago. Nothing very extraordinary, considering the great age of civilization in Britain. The date, I may add, being based on astronomy. We have followed the Fosse Way, which then existed as an Atlantean highway, running not far north of Avebury, passing through Chichester, a Philistine or Egyptian frontier city, leading on to Lincoln and York, and then northward again along the Ermine Street, to their destination. If this were their route, they marched through Syria, evidently with the consent of the Syrians. The passageway, avoiding the wilderness, as the scriptures describe, the forests and rough lands, is always important in tracing prehistoric movements. An exodus such as this indicates that the main thoroughfares must have existed, especially when the refugees were loaded up with their belongings. Higden and other antiquarian authorities have maintained that Ermine Street Ermine Street ran between Caithness and London. Now, for anybody that doesn't know, Caithness is at the very north of Scotland, and I'm sure everybody knows where London is, in the very south, almost the very south of what we call England. This supports his existence as early as the time of Abram, who set out from Ur of the Chaldees, South Orkney, and must have used a via through the immense Caledonian forest, so thick and impenetrable in many parts. As he went to Damascus before he moved to the land of Canaan, his journey affords evidence of the existence of Ermine Street. Alternatively, reaching London, Damascus, whence he turned westward, his probable route was the road known as the Devil's Highway, a very old route also, and part of the Great West Road from London to Staines via Bagshot Heath, then to Silchester, Marlborough near Ebbsbury, and finally to Bath. Now, there's an index number here, 63, which is important, so I'll read it. The Roman road from London, which branching at Silchester, communicated with west of England and South Wales, is not referred to in the laws of Edward, though it was as important as any of the four ways. It was as important as any of the four ways. The road takes a direct course from London to the Cross Thames at Staines, beyond which it bends slightly towards the south and then turns due west straight to Silchester, the Roman Caleva Artribatum. From Silchester, a road of which little trace remains led to the north. To the south, a road went to Winchester, and on to Porchester and Chichester, to beyond Southampton, and to Old Sarum. Now I know I've mapped all this, and the spine of Albion doesn't pass by or through Old Sarum, but it's very near it. So anyway, continue on. To the southwest, the Portway led direct to Old Sarum, from which one road went to Dorchester and Exeter, and another westward, perhaps on to the Mendips. From Silchester to the west was a road to Speen, where it divided, one branch going to Bath and across the Severn to Carlion and to South Wales, and the other to Chichester, Gloucester, Brecon, and to beyond Carmarthen. Crossing these roads was a road from Winchester by Marlborough to near Wamborough, which formed a part of Hedgens Erming Street from St David's to St Hampton. And T. Cordington, Roman Roads of Britain, 1919. So an important side note there. Roads sufficient for traffic, apart from tracks over Hull and Dale, of which numbers yet survive, speak eloquently of the means of transport, and there were numerous canals as well. In Plato's Critias, it is said that the Atlanteans possessed enormous numbers of chariots for warfare, as did also the Philistines and others, which necessitated highways. The god Hermes, among his many services to man, was the deity of traffic and roads, and images of him were set up at crossroads by the Greeks and Britons. And I can testify to this because a lot of milestones and a lot of boundary stones have symbols and carvings dedicated to Hermes. In fact, Edinburgh's Hermiston Gate and many of the stones around there are also dedicated to Hermes. So continuing on, hence the name Hermiston Gate at Hermiston in Edinburgh. Anyway, this takes us back to the long trek of the Israelites from Mizpah to Jerusalem, Avesbury to Edinburgh. Now this might be hard for people to take in. It's not in the Middle East, and never was. And the heavens declare it. And the standing stones. They tell the story of the biblical accounts. Anyway, continuing on. This takes us back to the long trek of the Israelites from Mizpah to Jerusalem, Avesbury to Edinburgh. For inferentially they had the consent of the Syrians to use their highway. It must have been a part of an agreement that their migration allowed them to use the use of the highway to their new destination, and any such agreement would assuredly have included consent to their seizing the city of Jebus, which, according to the Greek traditions, was a city of Enchelions or Enchelids. According to their geography, it lay in Illyria, the Greek Illyria being, as will be shown in due course, the British Siluria, where stands Edinburgh. The name Encheleans or Encheles can lead to an interesting disquisition, as these people who were absorbed into Judea, with a name so close to the Scandinavian Angles or English. At all events, the arrangement was apparently satisfactory to all parties. Shortly afterwards, we find that King Hiram of Tyre, at that time the wealthiest and most important monarch, proffered the most generous aid to David and Solomon, and assisted largely to build the Temple of Solomon, a temple dedicated to Moloch or Melech, which means king, it's a Hebrew word, the Tyrian Melchat, the god, not the hero, Hercules, otherwise Poseidon, the powerful lord. That this was so was indicated by its molten sea, which Josiah destroyed, and other Phoenician symbols. Hiram was probably the Hiram or Hermes of that period in the south, and was thus able to save the Israelites and become the patron and friend of David and Solomon. Now, I'll just say here, on my Facebook page I have made many posts regarding Hercules, but it's quite interesting here. Hercules is Molech, Malcolm, Marduk, later to be worshipped as Baal by the Canaanites and the Phoenicians and the Tyrians, who are the island of Portland, just off the west coast of England and Wales. So later on in time, Hercules or Poseidon, interesting that this powerful lord is also Poseidon, according to Comus Bowman, and I would agree with that too. The deities that we understand as Moloch, Malcolm Canmore, Marduk, the Dukes of Mori, or Heracles, where the called out one sits over Morishire. I would say that this is also Poseidon, and later became the Tyrrhenian or the lower world's god, known as Moloch or Melech. So very interesting. Again, my previous research ties in with the research, and my ongoing research ties in perfectly with what I'm reading on the Standing Stones, seeing Hercules, Poseidon, Moloch, all over the northwest, and Inverness and Tain, Dornoch, Moray Firth area. So, excuse me, continue on. Hiram was probably the high priest Ramesses or Hermes of that period in the south, just off the coast of Wales, and was thus able to save the Israelites and become the patron and friend of King David, or David and Solomon. And he references this in his book, The Riddle of Prehistoric Britain, and also the Chronicles of Herodotus, History, Volume 1, 73. So, this tends to simplify the situation, but in no wise fits in with the accepted sites in present Palestine. And this is what this is all about, to show people people who maybe not pick up a book, can't be bothered reading, or for whatever reason, even the small me recording this and hearing this small portion may be enough to trigger you to realise that your faith and your belief is very true and very real, but the system of Christianity and the placement of these events is a fabrication. And hopefully this recording will, a short snippet of this book will encourage you to go and read this book and the works that I have put together on my Facebook page and also my other YouTube channels. So This tends to simplify the situation, but in no wise fits in with the accepted sites in the present Palestine, where Hebron is sited a few miles from the current Jerusalem, and the powerful Philistines are accorded a tiny stretch of territory separated from Egypt by the desert of Sinai. Such geography is false to British history. The foregoing explains the itinerary of the Judeans to Jerusalem, Edinburgh. But what of Babylon? Babylon at that period had not achieved its later power. It was Chaldean or Syrian, because its founder Nimrod had descended from the mountains of Chaldea as the bold man and of great strength of hand. Oh, sorry, I missed a bit. He had descended from the mountains of Chaldea to the plain which they call Shinar. And there's a side note there which we'll read later on. Josephus describes Nimrod as the bold man and of great strength of hand, exemplified in Genesis chapter 10 verse 9 as the mighty hunter before the Lord, which of course is Nimrod Orion. This description is noteworthy because the fabulous great hero of prehistoric Greece was of course Orion, also the great and mighty hunter who was subsequently placed amongst the constellations. Now I'll just add in here as well, in my research what I've shown is this is an alchemic journey through what we call the spine of Albion or Jacob's ladder. And when I say an alchemic journey, it's a process aligning with the constellations, the houses and the asterisms above in order to chemically align and electromagnetically align yourself with the North Celestial Pole and the Pole of Heaven and the Tree of Life. And what I have shown people is Nimrod or Orion, which is the central belt of Scotland. It's projected 3 times over Britain and also throughout the world, but the main area from the North Celestial Pole, the first area down where Orion, Nimrod, falls, is in what we understand as the Glasgow area, Ayrshire, Arran itself, the Isle of Arran, which is named after Orion. It is the same name and the same word, and the ancient Celts and the Gaelic people called it the Isle of Arran because it is where Orion passes over. And I have shown this many times in many posts and many videos. But this Orion, this Nimrod character that we see in the heavens, is part of this alchemic process which we all must identify with. And this portion where Orion is within the ecliptic, within the 12 houses of the zodiac, where the planets pass through, this is the place where you represent Orion, the rebel within, going against the Taurus field, as I've said many times. And this Orion is the one who goes against the North Celestial Pole, goes against the bull, the Taurus of heaven, which pulls the plough, which is Ursa Major, Ursa Minor, through the Garden of Eden, which is the North Celestial Pole. And so here we have Combs Beaumont saying exactly the same thing as I have, that this Nimrod, this Orion, is the rebel within, which is part of that alchemic process, this esoteric, spiritual ascending which we all must go through. So I'll continue on and we'll just read to the end of the page and we'll probably finish up because we're reaching 30 minutes now. So I thank you for your patience and we'll continue on and just end up what we're reading here. I hope the people in Canada, Australia, America and those who have a faith remain strong in their faith and dig deep into the words of Combs Beaumont's books and many other books. You'll find many references on my page. This is not just punching in the air, grabbing at the wind. This is facts. It's written on stone. The foregoing explains the itinerary of the Judeans to Jerusalem, Edinburgh. But what of Babylon? Babylon at that period had not achieved its later power. It was Chaldean or Syrian, because its founder Nimrod had descended from the mountains of Chaldea, Scotland, to the plain which they called Shinar. Josephus describes Nimrod as a bold man of great strength of hand, exemplified in Genesis 10:9 as the mighty hunter before the Lord. This description is noteworthy because the fabulous great hero of prehistoric Greece was, of course, Orion, also the great and mighty hunter who was subsequently placed amongst the constellations. Corey, in his well-known work, states that Orion was the founder of Babylon and its first king. Nimrod and Orion were apparently one and the same. It may be permissible to draw the reader's attention to the curious resemblance between the ancient and long prehistoric hero Fingal, or Finmakul, the White Gale, and Orion. Fingal, illustrious warrior, conqueror and hunter, able in one stride to reach the Isle of Arran, or Arran Island, from Mull, resembles Orion, the mythical hunter of great size and strength, who was placed by Hermes among the constellations, where Sirius nearby is described by Homer as the dog of Orion, as Ben Cruachan was the dog of Fingal. And that's Fingal the Giant, and of course I've covered this before in numerous other videos and posts that I've put on YouTube. There was a bridge known as the Giant's Causeway, and that is the pathway of Orion and his dog. And all the constellations and standing stones from Dublin, Northern Ireland, up through Newgrange, Northern Ireland, Aboyne, the Boyne, which means heavenwards. Aboyne, that's because in Aberdeenshire there is Aboyne, which means heavenwards. They were the path of Orion, and his dog Sirius, also the same dog Ben Cruach of Fingal the Giant. This comparative myth suggests that Nimrod, one of the earliest, the race of Titans or sons of Adam, a great among giants, reputed as a great hunter, led his followers from the mountains of Chaldea, or Scotland, to the plain of Shinar, and was later immortalized by transfer to the celestial heavens in the ancient zodiac. This is in accord with the classical references to the earliest civilizations attributed to the Hyperboreans, or in other words, to the Chaldeans or the Ethiopians, all one and the same. So what he's saying here is these people are not in the Mediterranean or the Near East. It's here in Britain, including the Chaldeans, the Caledonians, and the Ethiopians, all one and the same. It accords also with the great antiquity of Babylon, which was traditionally built by giants. And I've covered all this: NKA, Ethiopians, Cassiopeia, the house of Cephas, king of Ethiopia, NKA, the descendants of A, NKA, and Leo. So I've covered all this on many posts in the past. Also, it fits in with the contention that the Gaelic Sanoans of Yorkshire and Lincoln were descendants of the Sennar in the plains of Shinar, whereby we return to the vicissitudes of Babylon, which I claim was the original city of York, formerly Erech, and later Stratos Tower, then Caesarea, and finally Eboracum or Jorvik. According to the vestiges of Berosus' History of the Chaldeans, he himself being one, Nebuchadnezzar sent his son against the Egyptians, again the word Egyptians, Wessex and Wales. So Wessex and Wales was the land of Egypt, of the south, Coal Syria, the central plain, and the Phoenician Dorset, and died while Nebuchadnezzar was absent on this campaign in which he was victorious. He hastened to return as soon as possible to Babylon and found that the principal men of the Chaldeans had preserved his throne for him. He adorned the temple of Bel and other temples with the spoils he had captured in the war. Beressus continues, he also rebuilt the older city and added another suburb to it on the outside, across the river, and so far restored Babylon that none who should besiege it afterwards should have it in their power to divert the river so as to facilitate entrance to it, as this he did by building 3 walls about the inner city and 3 about the outer. It is one of the characteristic features of Babylon that the main river flowing through the city is emphasized unusually. It lay on a branch of the river Euphrates, or Perath, which as claimed earlier related to what is now the North Sea. Now read that again, Christians and born-agains and Messianic Jews and all that. The Euphrates is the North Sea, which again I've covered in many of my posts, but was originally an extension of the Rhine, whose twisted and contorted mouths today indicate great geological changes in that region. And of course anybody who knows about Doggerland and the banks of the North Sea, which were Doggerland, then this will make sense. And it's not, Doggerland is not as far back in history as they are making out. Nothing is. Nebuchadnezzar, as Berosus said, foresaw the possibility of diverting the stream called Gozan, which is the river Ouse today in England, which very act Sirius did later accomplish with the aid of treachery from within. And these are from the Chronicles of Josephus against Apion 1:19. And I think that will do it there. We've read a good bit and we're 36 minutes. Keep shining, keep looking up, and do not forget that all of history is a lie. And the truth is in there, but it's been twisted. Good night. Owen.